Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Leaks emerging from the Red Bull camp about their developments for the 2023 season. Suggestions being made they may be able to unlock at least 0.3 of a second from their car, the RB18. Will that be enough to keep them ahead of the field going into the new year? Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you are new as always. Let's dive into this then. Amos have been doing a lot of articles over the last few days about the state of the cars, how are Mercedes progressing, how are Ferrari progressing, but also the champions in Red Bull, how are they getting on? Even Alfa Romeo have talked about the possibility, the very likely possibility, that many teams will get inspired, let's just say inspired, by the Red Bull for next season. We've seen what Aston Martin have done, we saw what Williams have done. Most teams went down the route of taking some inspiration, let's say, from the Red Bull chassis last season. We saw Haas take some ideas from the Ferrari, expectedly so. But how many teams are going to turn up in 2023 with a replica Red Bull? I suppose that does remain to be seen. Now, Red Bull themselves are, of course, going to iterate on their concept from 2022, and we saw the comments the other day from Adrian Newey, their chief technical officer, saying that, you know what, he reckons they'll be fine as long as they don't make any mistakes with regard to the penalty, the cost cap penalty, the wind tunnel testing time reduction, and they should be okay if they don't make any errors, effectively, which raised into question to a certain extent whether this penalty is, you know, enough to kind of cut short some of the advantage they might have gained from breaching the cap. And now this is the further talking point on how the cars next year are going to behave and where Red Bull might be favoured again. So next year we know there's a small change, I think, to the diffuser, but there's also the change to the floor ride height. They're raising it by, I think it's 10-15 millimeters or whatever the number is they finally came up with. Initially it was 25 millimeters that was proposed. Effectively this is an idea to combat the porpoising, and even right at the end of the season in Abu Dhabi, around some of the faster corners on the bumpier surfaces, the porpoising phenomenon was still in effect for some cars. Mercedes experienced it again at the end of the season, so I think they've made these changes to try and eliminate that phenomenon by raising the floor height, mandating it to be raised higher. Now apparently that is going to cost a significant downforce point, as the teams usually describe it as, which might be in the region of half a second. So there's a decent chance that next year's cars are slower than this year's cars, because raising the height of the floor means you get less of a seal in the kind of venturi tunnels for the air under the car, get less of a vacuum effect, get less of a ground effect in general, and therefore lose some downforce. So not a major deal, but a significant deal nonetheless, and often Mercedes were having to run their car higher than they wanted to because of this issue, and that's why they were losing some of the time. Now, remarkably, really, when you look to the Red Bull car, certainly around circuits like Baku and others as well, they were able to run their car higher than other teams, and this could potentially give them an advantage going forwards. So according to Mike Elliott, I believe, at Mercedes, that he reckons that Red Bull might have an advantage there because they drove with a higher ride height again during the 2022 season. So maybe one thing that favours them next year. Of course, Mercedes aren't necessarily going to say that this change benefits them, but it was argued at the time when this rule change was brought into effect that indeed it was kind of favouring Mercedes because they were the team that was struggling with the porpoising issues, and this is trying to counter that. But of course, Mercedes got over that really, as did the other teams, but nonetheless, the changes have been made. So that's one thing that Mercedes believe Red Bull might be benefiting from, but this is the other key one, and it's not just the Red Bull team that will be affected by this, but according to the article, the Red Bull 18, last year's car that won both championships, it never reached the minimum weight limit. So the 798 kilogram weight limit was brought in for the start of the year, and it never got down to that minimum weight. So we saw at the start of the season, we believe the Alfa Romeo was at that level, and that's arguably why at the start of the season, the Alfa Romeo was looking rather good, and then as time progressed, it fell off dramatically because other teams slowly took weight out of the car. They had a pretty aggressive weight cutting strategy on the RB18. You guys remember they tried to take all this weight off from even like the rear wing and stuff. That's why the DRS actuator of Max Verstappen wasn't working back in Spain, and they tried a few things. They had to put some weight back onto the rear wing because otherwise his DRS wasn't working, and all this type of stuff. Now, of course, they spent all that development time going into 2022 on the new fundamentals, right? On the new designs, the new philosophies, the new concepts for the new regulations. They've done the majority of that work now, and therefore a lot of the work this off-season can be going into making sure the car is at minimum weight. Now, we know that the Ferrari, we believe at least, was lighter than the Red Bull. We think the Mercedes was quite significantly overweight as well. So there is a rumour that Mercedes, like I think even Toto Wolff said, they've got a big weight-saving exercise for them over the winter, and that is one of their key priorities for the next season, to turn up with a car that is 798 kilograms, because the lighter the car is, the better, you know, F equals MA, all that good stuff. Better acceleration, better handling, everything you want from an F1 car, not being so sluggish like they almost look now nowadays with how heavy and bulky they are. Now, Red Bull, though, reckon that because their car was so significantly overweight compared to the weight limit last season, they can gain around 0.3 of a second compared to the final races of last year. That's a good, I mean, we always heard these numbers get thrown around at the start of the season. How much was 10 kilograms worth in terms of lap time? Maybe about 0.3 of a second, who knows? So maybe their car ended the season 5 to 10 kilograms overweight. They're going to take that, you know, that weight out by more than likely making certain components out of different materials, whatever they can possibly do, and reduce that lap time and therefore gain what is effectively free lap time. So Red Bull believe they've got quite a significant edge to still be gained because of this, and they can get about 0.3. Now, as I say, the cars next year might be 0.5 a lap slower just because of the new regulations with the higher ride height of the floor mandated, just because of the new regulations with the higher floor, but nonetheless a pretty remarkable statistic. So Red Bull, or at least it's believed Red Bull might be able to unlock a free 0.3 of a second. Now, whether Ferrari can do the same, whether Mercedes can do the same, I think Mercedes might not be too far off this, just because like we thought their car was also overweight last season. So there's a good chance that this advantage from Red Bull won't amount to much compared to the other top contenders, but compared to a team like, let's just say, Alfa Romeo that was on the weight limit last year and will be again this year, then that is quite a significant lap time edge that they could potentially gain. So definitely tweet your thoughts on that in the comments section below. Tammy goes on to say here from the article that during the end stage of the season, the development stage for the 2023 car, the RB19 at the time, didn't show any visible changes on the surface, but there's plenty to work on under the cover in terms of the floor and stuff, which is basically what Toto Wolff also said about the W14, that it looks on the outside the same to last year's car, but it is, well, he's promised that it's rather different under the hood. Might have a very similar story with the Red Bull next season, where it looks the same, but it might be, well, it should be even quicker in theory, and will Mercedes be able to catch up that amount if indeed Red Bull have pushed ahead again, especially given the fact that Mercedes admit they lost many months worth of developments because they had to spend that time on learning. Is that going to be enough to get back on level terms at the start of next season? Seems optimistic given how fast and hard Red Bull are pushing. Now, speaking of Red Bull, because we saw the other day, we talked about Sergio Perez, Max Verstappen, what that relationship is now, what that relationship might be in the future. And just some questions here, because Liam Lawson, pretty much their star Formula 2 driver, is going to drive with Super Formula this year, very fast racing series, but outside of the kind of, you know, Formula 2 ecosystem. But I think Helmut Marko and the Red Bull guys and Liam Lawson himself sees that as a better preparation opportunity than Formula 2. So instead of competing there for another year, he's going to leave Formula 2, go to Super Formula, and as he describes, getting him better prepared for F1. So whether that means that next season, after 1 year in Super Formula, he's going to be straight in the Alpha Tauri, or even better, who knows? But that seems a rather likely possibility based on the words that have been said here. And just to close out the video with this from Andretti, big news actually on this, because we've heard all these rumours the last few months or so. Andretti, headed by Mario Andretti, of course, like they want to get into Formula 1, but a lot of teams have vetoed it and said, well, you know, what do they really add? They're not necessarily partnering with you know, a new engine company to come in. Are they just going to be, you know, a bad team driving around at the back of the grid? Which is, you know, understandable concerns. They have to pay, like, to some degree an entry fee, and then the other teams have to kind of agree. It's not easy to become the 11th team on the grid in the circumstance. But they have reportedly received backing for an absolutely massive firm, Guggenheim Partners or something, a firm with almost 300 billion in assets. So that's pretty reasonable sum of money, and apparently they can fund Andretti's facility for this and pay the entry fee, which is pretty big because it could prove to other teams that, you know, they can be a valuable asset to the sport. And also, I think one of the key points that Toto Wolff is making is like, well, look, if you come in and you partner with one of these potential big new engine manufacturers to come through, then that kind of is good for the sport in some respects. And we know that Porsche are wanting to get involved. We believe that Ford are wanting to get involved. We know that Honda are looking to get involved. So there potentially are some targets out there for Andretti to say, hey, we can partner up with XYZ engine supplier, and we have the money now, so and we can have the facility and make it work. So, you know, that's going to be a difficult proposition for these teams to deny. So this got a lot of traction yesterday, 11,000 likes on this tweet, and I think for good reason, because it does add significant more credence to the idea that sooner or later, it's possible at least that we do have an 11th team on the grid. But very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. And just as I said earlier, speaking of that whole Verstappen versus Perez stuff, these were the stats this season between Alonso and Ocon. Obviously, these numbers far from tell the entire story of the season. Well, to be fair, they kind of do, just because of all the DNF numbers here at the bottom. And I mean, yeah, the point standings were close, but the DNFs obviously made it look rather better for Ocon than it could have been otherwise. guys, and definitely looking forward to seeing not just Ocon versus Gasly in the Alpine next season, but also what Alonso can do and whether that revenge story on Aston Martin is going to bear fruit. But very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.